G'day and thanks for watching. Welcome to the show, a show where we like to not just think we tell you what happened today, but hopefully by the end of it you'll get a very good idea of what really happened today. Special guest, former Labor leader Mark Latham will join us shortly. He shocked me on the air last year when he said that if he was a Labor MP and there was one final haymaker to be thrown, he would vote for Kevin Rudd to become Prime Minister. Well, there's a chance that might be happening a little bit sooner than we think. So, which way would he vote if there was a vote in the coming weeks? We'll talk to him. And of equal heft, and I'm very much looking forward to speaking to TV legend Don Burke and the big-brained and wonderful communications expert and journalist Kelly Conley. So, great show for you this evening. Remember, lots of ways to stay in touch. The hashtag is PMLive. Email pmlive@skynews.com.au. If you want to follow me on Twitter, that's pretty easy too. It is at PM on Air. We're on Facebook, just go searching for Paul Murray Live. So the point is this, there are lots of ways to stay in touch. I like to think of this as the most honest and real hour on TV anywhere, so be part of the conversation. Let's have one. Now, there's plenty to get to, and we'll get to leadership stuff and politics very shortly, but before everyone thinks the sky's about to fall in, I've got to say well done to the Prime Minister today. She put forward an idea that should have been put forward a long time ago and should have been law a very long time ago. The Prime Minister today, while suggesting where the country should be going in the next little while, she openly suggested that we should have a HEX-style system for TAFE students. Students who decide to go and do something else with their lives apart from potentially years 13, 14 and 15 of school. I think it's a fantastic idea. There are an awful lot of people who would prefer to go and get a trade but sometimes can't afford to do it, or maybe aren't able to get a job that will then help pay for them to go through and get their trade. If this is a way of making sure that more people can skill up and go into jobs that will mean they become millionaires with their hands rather than with their degrees, then I think it's a good and fair idea. I'd like to see this one get bipartisan support as fast as possible, and presumably it won't cost as much as the HEX scheme does. If we're able to pay for university students to go through and eventually people pay it back, of which I was one of those students, and I think it's a great idea, it should be the same for anyone who wants to advance their education, especially those who want to go and learn a trade. So well done to the PM, it's a good idea, and Tony Abbott, agree, just get this done. Keen to know what you think. Hashtag PMLive, email pmlive@skynews.com.au. Sorry, Conservatives, I can't throw you red meat every single night. Sharon McKenzie joins us now for the latest news headlines. Thank you very much, Sharon. If there's any breaking news, she'll be back during the program. As I said last night, and I gladly echo again, Fair Work Australia is taking way too long to deliver its report about Craig Thompson. Cathy Jackson had a lot to say last night on TV and again today at a press conference. I think that it is very obvious that this is a woman who is trying to tell the truth from the inside of an organisation that clearly is trying to shut her up. She's able to speak not on the behalf of her members via her office that she holds, but she's only able to garner attention for her position because of the office that she holds. Let me explain. She's able to speak out as a person, as an individual, but sadly not as a representative of the union. If that was the case, well, we all know what would happen. The fix would be in and she would be gone. But I completely agree with what Cathy Jackson had to say today. There is clearly an issue here. There is a significant problem that this has taken so long, and there are several government figures, and you saw the story that Sharon just brought you about the emails, but there are several issues that are very much going to be an ongoing problem regardless of what the findings of the Fair Work Australia report are, including exactly what communication, if you want to read that as interference, but communication there has been between the government and Fair Work Australia. How independent have they been? And you have Bill Shorten, who was on with Richo before. If you want to catch up on that, go to our website, skynews.com.au. The only problem is that Bill Shorten, who said that he's completely arm's length from the whole thing, has been saying very publicly today pretty much exactly when he expects the report to be delivered, in the first week of March. So exactly how involved is the government? If you know exactly when the end date is, now there's the odd email about suggesting that you were trying to work out what was going on as the investigation was being put together. There are no obvious answers yet, but there are an awful lot of questions. Speaking of, does it really take the best part of 3 years to try and come up with some questions that Craig Thompson, Michael Williamson and plenty of others have to answer? I think not. More in a sec. We're live across the country, only on Sky News. Thanks very much for watching. Remember, be part of the conversation via our hashtag of PMLive. Very special panel this evening, headed up by TV legend Don Burke. Don, nice to see you. Happy New Year. And again, a very modern shirt. This is what I like. You're dressing like, you know...
Well, the truth is, look, I'll come out. I wouldn't know a good shirt from a bag of manure, but I got a bloke by the name of Joe Jabara who says, listen, I can make you look human.
Well done, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, well done, Joe. Call me, I need some help. Mark Latham is the former opposition leader, but for some reason, people always think that we call you when there's Kevin Rudd news. This was booked, this was pre-arranged, and now, bang, there's Kevin Rudd news for us to talk about.
Maybe calling me and generates Kevin Rudd news. I've got some psychic link to the great man himself, and it activates his brain to get into the news cycle.
Did you have a good summer? Plenty of time in the pool watching cricket?
Yes, very good. Excellent.
Yeah.
Actually, I was coming back on a plane from our summer holiday, and I saw a movie, Moneyball, that had Philip Seymour Hoffman. And it reminded me that Kevin Rudd is the Philip Seymour Hoffman of Australian politics, because he's in every scene of every movie. He's omnipresent. He's everywhere.
And he's always playing essentially the same character.
So I'm glad I saw that movie, because it just warmed me up for this segment tonight.
All right, here we go. We're getting ready to fire up. And Kelly Connolly, Principal of Connolly Communications. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you.
How was your summer?
Fantastic.
Did you do staycations or did you actually go away?
No, we did the staycation, so the kids have gone mad. I'm so glad that school term has begun.
Yeah, you're not a teary mum. It's thanks very much.
Off you pop, off you pop.
Yeah, ta-da.
And great to come in here, because Mark and I have been sitting down getting gardening tips from Don while we've been
lovely.
waiting to go on air.
Well, at any time they will break out. Remember, there's always a fact sheet at the end of this program. Now, let's turn our attention to Kevin Rudd, the obvious stuff. But the word games that he got involved with today, here was his opportunity to get out there and even fake it and say, I work for Julia Gillard, I'm cool with working for Julia Gillard, even though we all know how he actually feels. He doesn't really hide it. Anyway, this is what he had to say in Brisbane today.
I'm proud to be a member of this ministerial team, which is very strong, very dedicated, very hard-working, in which Simon himself plays a very positive role, and in which I play my own part and will continue to do so.
Now, Mark, in politics, you know that it is, even when it is exactly the opposite of what you believe at that moment, you have to be able to sum up the courage to walk out there and say, I have complete faith in my leader, regardless of what's happening behind the scenes. He can't do that.
No, he can't do it with any credibility, but I think it's a measure of how absurd the situation's become. That the day before, Simon Crean has described one of his cabinet colleagues, Kevin Rudd, as a prima donna. And this is sort of just standard business now for the Gillard government. That just sort of washes into the news cycle. It's not too big a headline that there's two cabinet members trading insults. And I think it's a sign of the paralysis. One thing to point out is, why do we keep talking about Kevin Rudd? It's because of the paralysis. It's almost the perfect political storm that you've got a Prime Minister who's not popular, Kevin Rudd, who is the most overt destabiliser of a government that I've ever seen. He's just so clearly destabilising Gillard. He's really ringing editors, briefing journalists. He's all over this thing. You've got Rudd as a protected species. Apparently he can't be axed, because there was a deal with John Faulkner in the last election campaign that if Rudd stopped the leaks, he could be the foreign minister, so he's got that slot.
But deals
and
don't
at the same
mean deals
time,
in this government, you realise that.
And at the same time, there's no obvious replacement for Gillard. So you've got this paralysis and almost this surreal environment in which Rudd can get away with whatever he likes, people can call him whatever they like, and tomorrow somehow the government goes on.
How real is the challenge talk? Do you think that something is going to happen sooner rather than later? Because it feels like we get this sort of ramp-up feel, and then at the last minute nothing happens, and clearly he's behind that. But does this one feel real?
Well, I'd ignore the ramp-up that's generated by Rudd, because he's always saying that the challenge is just around the corner. It's a destabilisation tactic. His whole purpose really is to make sure that Gillard's polling numbers are so bad that regime change is inevitable. And he's hoping it will be towards him. But I think when push comes to shove, and Crean made a valid point that this sort of tactic is so transparent, it's despised by a large part of the caucus. There'll be a third force. I even saw a crazy report this morning that Crean might fancy himself as such a third force. It'll be some other third force that comes through, and probably in the great Labor tradition, Mark Arbib will conduct an opinion poll and they'll say, oh, you can have it.
It's interesting you mentioned Crean, because Crean was saying that the reason Kevin Rudd would not be elected leader again is because he's not a team player. And I don't know when it has been that being a team player has been a prerequisite for being the leader of the party. I mean, it seems to me that Julia Gillard wasn't much of a team player when she undermined Kevin Rudd, and I'm sure that Peter Costello doesn't think that John Howard was a team player, and I'm sure that Paul Keating didn't think Bob Hawke was a team player. So it's curious, the excuses.
Well, that's an interesting thing, is that, I mean, clearly everyone returns to their office and runs their own little fiefdoms, but how would it work in a cabinet room when the two of them are sitting there? Do you imagine that he sits there for the entire meeting silent or chips away? How do you think that it works inside that room where they're running the country?
Oh, I think they're professionally disloyal to each other and hide those tensions in a meeting. I mean, part of politics is having to sit next to someone, supposedly a colleague, who you absolutely hate their guts. It's just one of those surreal things in politics that you get through, and that's how they do it. The psychology of politics is interesting, and there's other parts of life. If you do something uncomfortable for long enough, there's a certain surreal comfort about it, and that's the best way to describe that environment.
Well, now, Prime Minister Burke, I want to ask you a question. If you had exactly the same circumstances as Julia Gillard, when Mark and I have talked about this before, the conclusion has been you've got to sack Kevin Rudd. Would you sack Kevin Rudd, and how would you, what would you do?
I probably would. I mean, he's just a festering wound, and unfortunately I think you would have to, absolutely. But the interesting one is that Mark didn't say is, who is that last man standing? It'd be interesting to actually try and guess here. All right, say you knock off a couple of them. See, Mark and I disagree about Simon Crean. I think Simon Crean is possibly the greatest Prime Minister we never had. I know your criticism is he does everything by bloody committees. I like consensus, and he's a very decent human being, and he's bloody smart. Maybe we want somebody like that. But have you got a thought of another last man standing after you have the purge?
Don, you've never planned a garden by committee. So you wouldn't run the country that way.
It's quite interesting because before we went on air, you were talking about particular sort of substances you could put on to stop the rot.
Yes.
In this soggy weather we've been having in Sydney.
like
Maybe they could apply
a
kind of eco-oil for politics or something.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the one bloke that never would have been elected, and I know I've mentioned it before, is LBJ. He was just a machine man, a boring bloke, and he did more legislative change, I think, than any other president. He freed the black people, he did so much, whereas the Kennedys actually didn't do anything much at all. I think Crean is a similar guy in that he's a machine man and he can get things done.
Well, that's the interesting question, is that do you think you become, with this Parliament the way that it is, would you be a better Prime Minister if you just looked at your watch and said, OK, we're going to lose in 18 months, but we'll make the most of the numbers that we have and we'll shove through as much as we've ever wanted to do? Or does every politician want to be re-elected? Would any Prime Minister desperately want the other term after that? Because I'm imagining 18 months is enough time to do a couple of things that you'd be remembered for, wouldn't you think?
You'd think so, and she has made great leaps forward in many areas, in policy and so forth, but every single time she has one leap forward, something pushes her back 5 steps. So she's clinging on with the edges of her fingernails, and she's not going to make it, and I don't think changing leaders will make a difference for them either. So,
Mark, there was, again, you shocked me last year when we were talking about all of this for the 700th time. But you said if you were a Labor MP, despite everything that we've said and talked about Kevin Rudd, that you'd vote for him to be leader as a haymaker, just to see what happened at the end. If you were one of those MPs now, would you do it? If there was a vote this week, which way would you jump?
I think that was early on when he was just starting the destabilisation, but he's become so insufferable and so permanently disloyal and omnipresent in the media that I don't think you could bear the sight of him. So maybe...
But hang on, is it just me?
It's the vomit principle. People can't get themselves up to vote for him because...
Yeah, but is it just me, or does the bureaucratic speak of the man drive you nuts? I can't listen to a word he says. It's all this, almost worse than yes, Minister, this bureaucrat speak, and you go... Oh, no, not again.
See, this is the problem. When leaders of past, we're quite reminiscent about them in such a warm, fuzzy way that we forget what annoyed us about them in the first place. And I think that will be the same.
You have some wonderful qualities.
Very true. All right, now let's move on and turn our attention to Cathy Jackson and what she's had to say about basically the Fair Work Australia dragging its feet when it comes to investigating Craig Thompson and the union opinion and various figures that, to be honest, names that history will forget, but it's important that they get investigated properly. Here's what Cathy Jackson had to say in Melbourne today about what she believes is potential government interference here, that's the reason why this is taking so long. It's the mates taking care of mates.
Is Fair Work Australia not resourced appropriately enough, or is it because there's been interference? I have no evidence of that, but I ask again, why is it taking 3 years?
Bill Shorten had something to say about it when he was on Sky News a little bit earlier this evening, his response from the government, and he's also the Industrial Relations Minister.
You look at the parliamentary Hansard throughout the last 2 years, whenever there has been any contact, it has been reported in the Parliament. Other than what's been reported in the Parliament, I'm not aware. No, and I understand some of those emails were reported in an answer in Parliament on December the 9th. What the Liberal Party's doing here, as they will, is they're dressing up old news and presenting it as new news. Now, I suppose they're allowed to do it.
Now, Mark, it's pretty obvious that there is a case to answer here. Does it need basically 3 years to formulate the question that they then have to answer?
Well, Cathy Jackson's not part of the Liberal Party. She's a trade unionist who's in a severely divided and probably a dysfunctional trade union at the moment. She raises a perfectly valid point. It's outrageous that it's taken this long. These are serious allegations. I'm sure 99% of the Australian people would think they should be dealt with promptly. The Parliament needs to know the truth of the matter, so it can understand the position of the member for Dobell. But I do think where she's overstepped the mark is to say, she's saying there's interference, but she's got no evidence. She really can't go forward in the public arena and make that slur against the government and Fair Work Australia, I suppose. What she's saying is that they've caved in to government pressure. You can't do that without evidence, so I think she needs to put up or shut up.
Well, I disagree with that stand entirely. If you're hanging on by 1 or 2 votes with a hung parliament and you've got somebody like that, whoever you are, if you had any brains, you would push the day away when you've got to have reckoning as far as you can. It's that simple. They're living day to day, week to week with that fragile structure. Yeah, pushed away.
But that's the whole problem, though, is that if they're involved in the process of trying to push it away, then they're fiddling what's supposed to be the independent umpire. So do you think, of the looks of things, that's what would be happening?
Politics
just because of that logic?
No, it's the art of the achievable, politics. And if you see it any other way, you're deluding yourself. Yeah. It is simply that. It's no more, no less.
See, this isn't about politics necessarily. She's a very brave woman who's been standing up for her members. And her members are some of the poorest people in the community, some of the hardest working workers who work for minimum wage and who've been ripped off by their union. And I think she has been very considered before she speaks. And so when she does speak, I tend to believe her, and I would like to see something done as well.
The thing is that, I agree, you can't say, I have a hunch but there's no evidence in the public forum, but I can understand somebody feeling so alone in that organisation, and when you're frozen out for whatever reason it might be, the pressure that gets on you, sometimes you end up, to use the term again, throwing haymakers because you think if I can just get the suggestion out there, then somebody will go digging. But is it a step too far to say, I've got suspicions unless you actually have evidence?
Look, I don't know, but my hunch is that she's speaking a truth, that she believes this, and that she's not throwing something out there just to stir up some trouble, because I don't get that impression from her of everything I've seen. She's got everything to lose from standing up and saying that, and not much to gain unless it's true.
The fact that Bill Shorten, this becomes very complicated in sort of subterranean Labor Party politics in Victoria. But basically, the fact that Bill Shorten is now, the former union guy is now basically the Industrial Relations Minister. To me, it's one of those things where, in moments like this, your automatic supposition is, well, clearly the fix would be in because he wants to keep the status quo. He wants to take care of all of the old union mates. That would be my unfair reading of it, but do you think that Bill Shorten is genuinely going to keep this as independent as possible?
Well, I'd expect so. I mean, it's a very serious allegation for the minister or anyone else to interfere in this process is a form of corruption, and it would bring down more than Craig Thompson. It would bring down senior ministers. So, the stakes are high here, and it's not for Shorten to explain so much because Fair Work Australia is an independent authority. It should explain. It should be giving a full and frank explanation of why it's taken 3 years to deal with such a matter. And short of that, they do themselves a disservice because there'll continue to be public suspicion, innuendo, and the sort of thing we've heard from Cathy Jackson.
That's right, and I think you touch on an important point, and a very big PR problem that this government has is that they are run by the unions, and that the unions decide who'll be leader. The unions are seen to be covering stuff up. They're seen to be interfering. They're seen to be organising rallies and doing stuff that is undermining the government. And so this is, believe it or not, this is what is very real and very true, is a huge PR problem the government has. And even people like Bob Hawke are saying we need to break down some of these barriers that are causing strife.
But it's that thing. I mean, again, these internal Labor Party things, they even put me to sleep while I'm talking about them. But still, is that the role of the unions and the Labor Party, when you're in charge of the party, the Conservative perspective of it and the way they make it out is that the union guy comes and knocks on your door and says, all right, Latham, we're doing A, B and C. What's it actually like?
Well, they never did that to me in my short tenure, mainly for the reason that every significant union bloc was against me in the caucus ballot, and they all supported Kim Beazley. So my policy was to ignore them as much as I could, and that was easily done because they didn't really see me as their man. But they certainly thought they had a good hold over Beazley and Crean, not so much Rudd. That's one of the reasons Rudd lost the job. But they certainly think they've got a fair hold over Gillard, and she does a few little things to sort of pacify the union voting blocs. So people have just got to live with that. I don't think it's any way to run a political party or a government or a country, but that's the way it goes.
Something that also was worth having a look at in all of the HSU story was that the HSU was able to, despite having other financial difficulties, come up with several $100,000 that they were able to give to the Labor Party in donations. Surprise, surprise. But a full list of the donations is up on the AEC's website. Makes for some fascinating reading. Some different holding companies, some resources companies, some individuals are even able to give up to $350,000 was being thrown the way of certain parties. The biggest single donation that I was able to work out was the bloke who invented whatif.com.au, who gave to the Greens $1.6 million. He was able to get in there. The political donation system, is it broken, do you think, when an individual can turn around and throw that much money? Because quite obviously what you're buying with that is an expectation of access should you get re-elected. Isn't that the idea?
I don't know. He's a conservationist, and he believes in the environment, and he's thrown this money at a party he thinks might do some good. I kind of...
Well, even broader than him, just the general idea of, I'm coming to you as politician, I'm coming to you as party, here's some cash. What do you think the expectation is of that?
Of course they expect access. Why else would they do it? Especially the tobacco companies and so forth. But I think it's interesting in the light of watching the primaries in the US and the kind of money we're talking about over there, and I'm grateful we don't have a system that needs that kind of cash and the amount of promises they must be offering.
Well, that's the thing, and Mark, I'll get your insight in a second, but just money in politics, do you consider it to be dirty, Don, or just free speech as has been?
I was just looking at a lot of it, like National Australia Bank, Westfield and so on, make essentially the same donations to each party, just covering their backs and so on. I think a lot of that is quite innocuous, because if you say they're balancing one way, well, they're balancing the other way as well, so what the heck. Look, I don't know. I think if you have vested interests and a particular party may stand for those better if you're donating to it, as long as it's above board and everybody knows. I mean, that's the real world, isn't it?
Yeah, I do have concerns when it's media companies that throw some money in, and all of the TV networks did so to either side of politics there. I have concerns about that only because so much money can come back to a media organisation in government advertising. There are industry reasons that you want to lobby a government, but to me it seems that if you're able... I mean, where do the election ads get spent? They get spent
you can ask Kelly.
In media.
I've been in the media and have been able to watch people and talk to people and know a lot. I have never seen examples of any of that sort of influence coming through.
No, me neither. But
I mean, clearly you trembled at the shadow of Packer 300 kilometres away, just if he looked at you. And there were things like that. But on the other hand, I don't remember him interfering with much. But certainly these other groups don't. They really don't. The journos I know fiercely fight for what they want to do. They would not tolerate interference. They may be left or right of centre, but you've always got to have a spread like that anyway. But I've never seen that. Have you seen it, Kelly?
No, and you look at the fair treatment, I think, of the plain packaging laws, and I think that says it all, really. I mean, I never saw interference when I was working at a current affair or in the Nine newsroom.
Nor have I here.
There's sometimes like, oh, mate, did you have to do that to Woolies? You know, because they spend a lot of money with us. It's more sort of like that. And I go, well, I think that's fair, and they make an assessment. They go, okay, and they back you.
The only one I can tell you is, having watched them, every ferocious media person I ever even heard of, when they walked near Kerry Packer, turned into Manuel from Fawlty Towers. They cringed and...
All except one, my friend. All except one. Now, Mark, do you think there is any need to change the donation system? Is money free speech as they view it in America?
Well, they're looking to change it in New South Wales, and that's a step in the right direction. I think the problem you've got really is that with the 24-hour news cycle... programs like Sky, dare I mention it, governments feel under constant pressure from a whole range of commentators, controversies, interest groups, and I think we've now moved into an era where governments just fold their tent very easily. We've seen that on the mandatory pre-commitment for poker machines, where, you know, in our list of donors here, you see the clubs industry, we know the size of their campaign, what they were threatening to do, and the government just folded even in a very narrow majority parliament. So the era of big public interest reform that might upset some people, but it's good, is probably past. And I think the donation system feeding into that and the public money that's spent in other ways by the mining industry, the clubs industry, is not good for our democracy.
Speaking of donations, we've got to take a break. We're live across the country, only on Sky News. Plenty more to talk about. Thanks very much for watching. I'm here in conversation with Don Burke, with Kelly Connolly and with Mark Latham. Now, Mark, you mentioned quickly before the poker machine reform. You were quite passionately in favour of the pre-commitment. You'd seen the issues in your local area. Were you disappointed that the Prime Minister folded on it?
Yeah, very much so. I thought it was the one decent thing the Gillard government was doing. I don't think their climate change stuff will save the environment. I think their economic management just builds on the Howard legacy. The one thing they could do to make Australia a better and fairer place would be to move on this problem gambling issue. It's a tragedy, and I think we spoke about it before Christmas, that effectively they were going to swap Peter Slipper for Andrew Wilkie's support. That's what they've done as a political manoeuvre. It breaks the commitment to Wilkie, it adds to the distrust in Gillard and the strength and credibility of her word to people. And worst of all, it just allows the problem to fester. And it caves into the clubs industry. And the point I made before the break about the weakness of our political system now, if 30 years ago state politicians had listened to the clubs industry, we never would have had random breath testing, which in New South Wales alone has saved 15,000 lives, estimated. Now, you know, just imagine that. 15,000 people, their lives saved because a government did the right thing in the public interest as opposed to the narrow scare campaign of the clubs industry. And this issue is much the same. Now, people aren't dying on the roads, but I tell you what, there's a lot of families, a lot of kids who to go to bed every night in gambling-infested homes, a lot worse off, their life prospects damaged, because governments haven't got the guts to stand up to the clubs industry and do what's right.
Yeah, it is interesting to read those donations. In the New South Wales government now, the Liberal Party, its two biggest donors were the club and pub industries, the hotel industry followed by the club industry. AEC.gov.au to look through the full list. I guarantee you should do that if you care about how the system actually works. Now, let's turn our attention to, again, money and politics, but this time in the United States. Mitt Romney has broken away and has won the Florida primary. No great surprise. Now, to give you an idea of just how much money was spent in all of this, the super PACs, which are unaffiliated, groups that support the different candidates, the one that supported Newt Gingrich, who came second by about 17 points, that they spent $6 million in one state for one primary. The Mitt Romney one, they spent $14 million. There were literally 19,000 negative ads that played in one state over basically a month. Now, I love American politics for the theatre and all the rest of it, but once you start getting up into those numbers, Don, it's ridiculous that that's what you need to do to advocate. And none of those ads are about advocating themselves as candidates. It's shit-canning the other guy.
And it's never ending. It's like that dreadful poker game where you keep upping the bets, and more what it favours is the incredibly rich being the only ones that can stand as well.
Correct.
So you destroy democracy along the way. Think of all those smart little buggers down there that are not terribly wealthy that could be such great leaders. And, you know, we're talking about the Labor Party and all that before. What they're lacking is vision. These blokes in America, there's no vision coming out of any of them. They're just trying to shoot the legs off the other guy. Their own party.
Yeah.
Well, what's also quite amazing too is that 40% of the people who voted in Florida today apparently told exit polls they wish there was another candidate. They don't like who's there in the end. You've got the robot in Mitt Romney, or you've got the Conservative with way too much baggage in Newt Gingrich, Rick Santorum, who's got no hope and he's right out on the right, and Ron Paul, who can't go any further than his current base of support. So basically, it's pretty incredible that after all that money, you've still got almost half of people saying, somebody else, please.
But only 30% odd of them vote anyway, isn't it?
Well, that's it,
something like that,
so we're talking of the 40 of the half of that. We're getting right down to this fractional number who decide...
bloody care.
Exactly, who runs the country.
All
They'll
that
probably
money.
have record low turnout.
Yeah. But something, how do you view the American political system and also this cycle, these people, and when you see these guys, do you assume, the next 4 years better or worse for the world, or how do you view it?
Well, I think the system's weak, and the candidates portray that weakness. On the other side, Obama is a very weak president. I mean, the hope-changey thing hasn't worked, and he's on the economic issues, he's ripe to be voted out. On the Republican side, the candidates are weak, as you pointed out. And you go back in history. I mean, the last contest, McCain and Obama, I suppose Obama made it look charismatic and inspirational, but under the surface, they were both pretty weak candidates. The one before that, Bush and Kerry, weak. Now, you go back to the contests in the 60s, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon. I mean, these were people of infinitely greater substance than what they've got now. So they've got a real personnel problem, and that probably reflects the fact that they're a fading power economically and in international affairs, the tragedy of Iraq. They're a fading power, and they've got fading political firepower in their key candidates.
Politicians everywhere, and obviously in America it's probably the finest example of it. How much are we to blame because we constantly search for nonsense as news or nonsense as outrages, which means you end up either getting the candidate who is the least offensive, and by contrast, often the one who doesn't really stand for that much, and that's who ends up being the battle of the beige all the time, because if somebody did stand for ideas and said, you know what, even if it's unpopular, we're going to bang this out, in the media, we would all go nuts about that.
Yeah, we do. And you're talking
we don't
about
like studying
our system,
for exams.
You're talking about our system now, not theirs, right?
Yeah.
And I agree. There's not a battle of ideas. Doesn't seem to be a battle of values. There just seems to be a bunch of leaders trying their very hardest not to get tripped up by the media. Now, my core business is media training, so I shouldn't be talking it down, but I do believe politicians have gone way too far on media training. And it's hard to know who's to blame. Is it the politicians for being so safe? Is it the media for trying to trip them up all the time? Is it the public who have this thirst for scandal? I'm not sure what it is, but the end result is we have boring politicians who do not inspire us and who do not give us any idea of their vision. Well, and I think it's a shame.
Well, also the thing was, and I edited this down today, is that Mitt Romney delivered about a 10-minute speech talking up how wonderful everything was winning Florida. 2 minutes of it were cliches. Literally 2 minutes of it were cliches. His campaign slogan is "Believe in America. I'll restore America's greatness."
Yeah.
The scary thing below the cliches and the rhetoric, the scary thing about the Republican Party is the decline of Kissinger realism on foreign policy. A lot of good experts are saying that the Republicans, no matter who it is, if elected, will sleepwalk America into Iran, repeating the same mistakes they made in Iraq, and that's pretty scary. The hard-headed realism in foreign policy has just totally deserted the Republican Party, partly under the influence of these Tea Party nutters, partly a product of the Bush legacy. But it's the scary thing for the world. That you listen to these foreign policy debates, and there's a lot of loopy stuff out there.
And it doesn't seem, you're right, because I listened to that speech today with Mitt Romney, and it didn't seem to be about foreign policy as so much an inward-looking sort of thing. Like, we will create the biggest defence force and take on the world.
Don't tune into the foreign
stuff.
policy debates.
They're
real scary.
But you're so right. Kissinger and even Thatcher called a spade a spade. They were visionary and they stood up for what they believed in. It's not there now. But can I agree with what you were saying? I don't think you get the politicians you deserve. You get the politicians you create. Yeah, and I think we've created these mealy-mouthed nobodies.
Yeah, I agree. Keen to know what you think? Hashtag PM Live on Twitter. Email pmlive@skynews.com.au. We'll take a break, and then I'm keen to know what everyone thinks about Red Dog walking away with the most bogan award in the history of film, The Actor, which was given away last night. More in a sec. We're live across the country, only on Sky News. Thanks very much for watching. I'm here in conversation with Mark Latham, with Kelly Connolly and with Don Burke. Keep the comments coming via Twitter, our hashtag PM Live. We're also on Facebook. Just go searching for Paul Murray Live, and you can follow me personally on Twitter, which is PM On Air. Now, guys, a couple of quick things to run through before we're done. Red Dog picked up Best Picture last night at the ACTA Awards. That is the new version of the AFI Awards. I haven't seen it. I don't think any of us have seen it, but you've seen half of it.
I've seen half of it.
So that's good enough. Was it any good?
Yeah, but look, it had been so
She
hyped.
walked out halfway through.
No, it was
terrible.
I walked out of my own living room. It's on DVD now. But it was... look, I thought it was a really sweet Australian movie, and perhaps I wasn't in the right mood, or perhaps too many people had hyped it up to me and told me I had to see it. And so when I did, I was kind of like, oh, this is nice, but, you know, it's very Aussie. I watched more of that than I did of Snowtown, which picked up a number of awards. That was way too gruesome. Followed the trial, read the book, couldn't watch the movie.
Well, this is the interesting thing. I was talking about this today. Now, the awards aired on Channel 9. They wanted to make it a big splash, big attention thing. And the Oscars are having this problem, Don, which is basically you've got to decide what you want to be as the award show. If you want to award the movies people see or the movies people love, you're going to award stuff that's probably not critically spectacular. You're going to be awarding your Avatars and, in this case, your Red Dogs. You know, whereas in the past, Australian movies, the ones we honour are the most depressing ones we could possibly come up with the abusive father and the drug addict and the person on the other side of the fence, all of this stuff. Do you think awards should be given out on merit and artistic things, or just it's a TV show and give them what they want?
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. When you look back, you know, John Wayne never really won an Academy Award. He got a lifetime one at the end, but the same sort of thing, that he gave people so much enjoyment, but that didn't qualify him for an Academy Award, and I guess we're guilty of doing the same thing. I listened to how grand a lot of those actors are and all the rest of it, but gee whiz, some of them are very good. You look at Geoffrey Rush, what an incredibly talented man. And, you wish him all the success he gets, but I suppose we do get a bit grand about movies and try and award them for technical things or whatever, when something else may drive the public. But what, $20-odd million have been taken by Red Dog?
For an Aussie movie, that's obviously
good.
pretty
I
amazing.
reckon that deserves a pat on the back.
Yeah,
why not?
Absolutely.
They're grand indeed, because I heard some people as they went into the ceremony saying this will be like the Oscars one day. The Australian actors...
Yeah, settle down.
We're building up. This has got so much potential. They really hype themselves up. It's a state of delusion, isn't it? This is going to be like the Oscars one day. I gave up. I reckon we should have closed down the Australian film industry after the movie Australia. With the Drover.
Yes.
As soon as the Drover started to talk, Hugh Jackman, in that atrocity of a movie, someone in the federal government should have pulled the plug totally on all the government funding. What an absolute hopeless abuse.
Hugh, please.
Oh, well, okay.
Attacking who?
But our Hugh.
There are some very great movies that were a failure at the time. It's a Beautiful Life with Jimmy Stewart.
Yes.
Was an absolute dead dog movie, and as the years tick by, it's become one of the greatest movies ever. So we don't always know ourselves what's a good movie.
Are you forecasting that for Australia? With the Drover?
No, I agree. No.
Guys,
Al
Nicole. Now, just before we go, I want to show some Super Bowl ads in the lead up to the big event which is taking place next week, Patriots versus the Giants. Go Giants. Now, this is a Jerry Seinfeld ad, and he's flogging another car ad. This one's actually clever, though. Have a look.
I would love to have the first one.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Seinfeld, but you're number 2 on the list.
Who's number 1?
That guy.
Okay. So, you're number 1.
Yeah.
How'd you like to be number 20?
I'll throw in the soup Nazi. Soup for you. I own all the characters.
Last living munchkin.
I thought he passed away.
I found another one. Dancing holographic monkey?
I have one.
Oh, sorry, bad idea.
How about a new boat? No!
Final offer. For the record, I don't think I like you quite as much as I did at the beginning.
I'm listening.
Access to my personal network of Manhattan zip lines.
Wow! Impressive. You got the first Acura NSX. How about a jetpack flying squirrel suit? New York to LA, 20 minutes. Sergeant.
They curse Leno like I do. I love that they spend that much cash on the 2-minute versions. A 30-second ends up on the TV. I would love to see us do more event ads here in Australia, and the lead up to a grand final or Logies Nights or something like that, because the advertising industry, bloody clever, and it's a little mini funny film.
Before I come back on this show, I want one of those dancing holographic monkeys.
All
Where
right.
do you get those things?
I want the soup Nazi on the panel.
All right.
I think it's great to see the soup Nazi back.
All right.
He's ageless. Jerry's age,
Yeah.
but the soup Nazi looks exactly the same.
We'll bring him back.
And it just proves that when Elaine Benner said, "You're finished, soup Nazi," next, she was wrong. He's a survivor.
Thank you, one and all. See you later, and see you tomorrow night. Sharon's got the latest news headlines. Follow us on Twitter, PM On Air. See you tomorrow.